help distribute the assistance that we will deliver. During the Palestine Donor Group in Brussels, India announced that it is committed to build a specialized hospital and a center for prosthetics, as well as a training center, vocational training center in Palestine. India also will contribute to building the Palestinian Institute. We have sought to alleviate the suffering of the civilians in Palestine, but at the same time we must seek a permanent political solution. India's support to the two-state solution is well known to all. India believes that the establishment of a Palestinian state that is sovereign, independent, and viable, living side by side in peace with Israel within secured and recognized borders is important to reach a permanent solution.
Madam President, on Lebanon, the Blue Helmets serve in challenging circumstances. UNIFIL peacekeepers pursue UN Security Council mandates and therefore must never become targets. They serve the cause of international peace and security. India has strongly condemned all attacks on UNIFIL peacekeepers. Their safety and security are a priority. The sanctity and inviolability of UN premises must be fully respected. Further, it's important to be ready for a post-UNIFIL scenario, and in this context, the Lebanese armed forces must receive requisite support and assistance. On Syria, we stress the importance of a Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process in line with UNSC Resolution 2254. The principles of sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic must remain central to all efforts. We also reiterate our support to ongoing efforts in finding long-term solutions. On Yemen, India reaffirms its unwavering commitment to the unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the Republic of Yemen, and rejection of any interference in its internal affairs. We further condemn attacks by Houthis on maritime navigation. The protection of the Bab el-Mandab Strait and the southern Red Sea is a shared international responsibility and is a global interest. Madam President, the people of the Middle East need normalcy and lasting peace. As a member state guided by our civilizational doctrine of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the whole world is one family, India is committed to global well-being and a more secure, stable, and prosperous world. India will continue to be driven by this approach. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of India for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Norway.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by expressing Norway's deep concern over the current instability in the Middle East. Recent developments have once again demonstrated how quickly tensions can escalate. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint, to respect international law, and to prioritize dialogue over confrontation. In the context of rising regional tension, we cannot forget the situation in Palestine. Despite the ceasefire in Gaza, civilians are still being killed. The humanitarian situation remains desperate. Far too little medicine, essential goods, and emergency aid is reaching an already severely affected civilian population. Despite improvements since the ceasefire, acute food insecurity remains widespread. Furthermore, Israel has voiced ambitions to control up to 70% of Gaza, and an earthen barrier to entrench the division of Gaza is being constructed. This underlines the importance of moving forward with the implementation of the 20-point plan and Security Council Resolution 2803. Norway reiterates that international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties. Humanitarian assistance must reach those in need safely, rapidly, and without obstruction. The situation in the West Bank is equally concerning. Military operations, continued settlement expansion, extreme levels of settler violence, demolitions and displacements undermine trust and threaten prospects for lasting peace. Such developments are in breach of international law and further erode the foundations for the two-state solution. President, the Palestinian Authority's worsening fiscal crisis, caused in large part by the continued withholding of revenues that belong to Palestine, as well as other economic restrictions, are bringing essential public services to the brink of collapse. We call on Israel to urgently release revenues that rightfully belong to the Palestinian people. In this context, we cannot ignore Israel's extensive use of administrative detention without formal charge. Thousands of Palestinians are being detained in Israeli prisons without charge or trial. Human rights organizations describe prison conditions for Palestinians as severe and life-threatening, citing inadequate food, denial of medical care, and abuse. We urge Israel to uphold its human rights obligations towards detainees under international law, including by granting the ICRC immediate access to all detention facilities, as stipulated in the recent Israeli Supreme Court ruling. President, we need renewed efforts to ensure Palestinian institutions are strengthened, concrete and timely recovery and reconstruction, respect for international law, and accountability. Norway remains firmly committed to the two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Norway for that statement. I now give the floor to Ms. Nasria El-Ajafliti, chargée d'affaires ad interim at the Permanent Observer Mission of the League of Arab States to the United Nations.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President, and congratulations on presidency over the Security Council this month and doing this with wisdom and responsibility.
Before I begin, I would like to thank Mr. Al-Akbarov for his comprehensive briefing. I would also like to align ourselves with the statement delivered by the permanent representative of Jordan in this regard. Madam President, allow me to deliver this statement before your august Council on behalf of the Secretariat of the League of Arab States on the dangerous developments in the region and the need for a responsible international action to end the attacks, prevent the expansion of the conflict, and maintain the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Arab countries. I quote, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East is going through a dangerous phase where circles of confrontation are widening and crises are intertwining in a way that threatens regional and international peace and security. Current developments have reaffirmed that the security of the region is indivisible and that stability cannot be achieved with occupation, the use of force, the interference in the internal affairs of states, or by turning their land, water, or airspace into battlefields to settle scores. The Palestinian question, as it remains without a just and permanent solution, it remains the essence for the absence of security and stability in the region. There can be no peace with the Israeli occupation, with settlements, with annexation and displacement. There can be no stability as the Palestinian people are denied their right, their legitimate right to self-determination and the establishment of an independent sovereign state with East Jerusalem as its capital. In the Gaza Strip, the urgent priority is to fully implement Security Council Resolution 2803 to end the attacks, to strengthen the ceasefire, and to guarantee the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and to move towards the second phase, including the full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza and the beginning of recovery and reconstruction efforts. Obstructing the implementation of this resolution or implementing this resolution in a selective manner could undermine the calm and drag the region back to the circle of violence. The U.S. administration holds a special responsibility in guaranteeing the implementation of the peace plan launched by President Trump last October, which was supported by the League of Arab States and the Security Council, to lead to the reconstruction of Gaza and to open a political track to establish the Palestinian state based on the two-state solution. We must combat Israeli procrastination aimed at emptying the plan of its content to prolong the current situation, as 2 million Palestinians continue to suffer, many of whom live in tents and lack food and basic educational and health services. In the West Bank, including the occupied East Jerusalem, settlements and the confiscation of Palestinian property and land are ongoing. In the absence of the effective implementation of Resolution 2334, which undermines the two-state solution and imposes a de facto annexation, attacks by settlers, including the killing of civilians, the burning of homes and places of worship, these reflect a systematic policy of forced displacement carried out, unfortunately, under the protection and encouragement of the occupation government. This requires urgent action from the Security Council to protect the Palestinian people. This protection is necessary to end the terror of settlers against unarmed civilians. Madam President, maintaining the security of the Middle East means we must address tensions based on respecting the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries by supporting their national institutions, by rejecting occupation, division, and foreign interventions, by relying on political solutions and international law. In this regard, the League of Arab States strongly condemns Iranian attacks that targeted a number of Arab countries as a blatant violation of their sovereignty, of international law, of the principles of good neighborliness. We also condemn the targeting of commercial vessels and threats to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, in the Red Sea, and Bab al-Mandab Strait. These have dangerous repercussions on energy security, supply chains, food security, and international economy. And we call for a safe passage through these corridors to end this suffocating crisis and to recover stability in the region. The League of Arab States call for a quick return to the understandings reached between the United States and Iran and a resumption of negotiations, a de-escalation, an end to attacks and violations, and a return to diplomacy while fully respecting international law and international legitimacy. In conclusion, Madam President, the crises in the region, although different, they reaffirm the same truth. No stability can be achieved with occupation. No security can be achieved as the sovereignty of countries are violated, and no future can be achieved if institutions are weakened or divided. We call on the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility and guarantee the full implementation of its resolutions without selectivity or delay to protect unarmed civilians and maintain the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries and support just and permanent political solutions. End of quote. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ms. Kliti for that statement. I now wish to give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Madam President. Japan thanks the Democratic Republic of the Congo for creating this opportunity. The situation across the Middle East remains volatile and precarious, with multiple crises unfolding simultaneously. This pursuit of diplomatic solutions is more essential than ever. Despite the momentum toward a possible ceasefire generated by the mediation efforts of many countries, Japan is deeply concerned by the recent escalating exchange of attacks. Our immediate priority must be to de-escalate tensions and restore regional stability, including by ensuring free and safe navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. Negotiations should continue with a view to addressing various issues, including the Iranian nuclear issue, one by one. Vessels should be able to transit the strait without being subject to tolls or any other additional costs. There is no rationale or legitimacy in taking the global socio-economy hostage by disrupting peaceful passage through the strait, which has long served as a global public asset. Japan will continue to make every effort to foster an environment conducive to dialogue between the parties in close coordination with the international community. We welcome the trilateral framework agreed between Lebanon, Israel, and the United States as a meaningful step toward lasting peace. We reiterate our call for the respect for Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity and the full implementation of the relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1701. Hamas's recent announcement regarding its preparations for the transfer of administrative responsibility to the National Committee for Administrative of Gaza, NCAG, and Israel's approval of the deployment of International Stabilization Force and NCSAG in Gaza are positive steps towards the operationalizing of the second phase of the comprehensive plan in line with the Security Council Resolution 2803. At the same time, Israel is also required to withdraw its forces from Gaza and facilitate unhindered humanitarian access. We are also gravely concerned by the deteriorating situation in the West Bank, particularly the escalation of settler violence against Palestinian civilians, and reiterate our call on Israel to take the necessary measures. As part of our initiatives to expand our assistance network toward achieving peace through a two-state solution, Japan co-hosted the ministerial meeting of CPAT, the Conference on Cooperation among East Asian Countries for Palestinian Development, last week. CPAT's approach is to leverage the resources and development expertise of East Asian countries to contribute to Palestinian state building. Japan will continue to play a constructive role in advancing diplomatic efforts toward peace and stability in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Spain. Many thanks indeed, Madam President. Since the last open debate on the situation in the Middle East, the situation has worsened drastically. In view of that fact, the international community should assume its responsibility to change the course of a situation which, should it worsen, will threaten global stability on several fronts. In view of the open conflict in the Gulf, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the threat against Bab el-Mandab, in view of the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the violations committed by the occupation in the West Bank, in view of a situation that remains fragile in Lebanon, Syria and Iraq, our efforts today must unite to demand compliance with international law and IHL. There is no military solution to conflict. We are fully committed to efforts at a multilateral level. As such, Spain defends diplomacy and dialogue as the only viable and effective path towards the resolution of conflicts. We support the laudable work done by regional mediators, many times or often under attack, and we support the immediate cessation and permanent cessation of military operations on all fronts. It's only in working in that way that we'll forge a sustainable peace which endures over time. Allow me in this connection to reaffirm the importance of the full and effective participation of women in negotiation processes. Respect for international law is the only way to resolve all unresolved questions with Iran, including the crisis around the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear file. In light of the above, we express our grave concern at this new escalation of violence. We reiterate the fact that we condemn the indiscriminate and unjustified attacks by Iran against neighbouring states, and we urge parties to cease all military operations. They must fully guarantee the freedom of navigation in accordance with international law, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and Security Council Resolution 2817. The arbitrary blockade of the Straits of Hormuz and the threats against Bab el-Mandeb are an unacceptable violation of the freedom and safety of navigation. Moreover, they constitute a violation of the norms that govern us as an international community and stand as a threat to global prosperity and security. President, events in Iran must not bury the alarming situation in Palestine, which is worsening daily in Gaza and also in the West Bank, including in East Jerusalem. Spain is fully committed to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace, one rooted in the two-state solution in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, including Resolution 2803. We reiterate the need to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. They are our vital partner and the only body with the legitimacy required to ensure the viability of a lasting, sustainable peace, and one which meets the aspirations of both the Palestinian and Israeli people. Turning to Gaza, we, before this Council, once again underscore the urgent need to implement Resolution 2803. We condemn the expanded presence of the Israeli army in the Gaza Strip, and we underscore the overriding need to act with urgency to palliate the humanitarian disaster besetting more than 2 million inhabitants in Gaza. We appeal to the Israeli government to allow the entry of humanitarian aid at scale, and they must also protect the UN's work, including that of UNRWA, in the midst of the greatest financial crisis that has ever beset the United Nations system. In 2026, Spain so far has already disbursed more than $15 million to Euro. We wish to condemn the adoption of the law on the death penalty in Israel and the state of Palestine. The terms of this law are discriminatory against the Palestinian people. This discrimination is gravely alarming because it enshrines legal inequality between persons and lays waste to the most fundamental guarantees of due legal process on an issue which directly undermines the fundamental right to life. It is an attack against the very principles of human dignity and equality. On the West Bank, we fervently condemn the hasty expansion of Israeli settlements and the continued proliferation of settlement outposts. At the same time, we're seeing a rising tide of violence which enjoys impunity, that is settler violence, and we're seeing arbitrary restrictions on Palestinian land access. We urge accountability for these violations. They threaten the viability of the Palestinian state. At the same time, they violate international law. Turning to Lebanon, we recognize and support the brave decisions taken by the Lebanese government in defense of the full respect for its national sovereignty, and territorial integrity. We reiterate our commitment to the full implementation of Resolution 1701. We reiterate our firm support for the Lebanese people and Lebanese institutions. We will continue to support efforts to forge a lasting stability. We fully support the strengthening of the LAF bilaterally and together with our European partners. Our work here is to ensure that the LAF can consolidate control across the full extent of Lebanese territory. Here, we welcome the signing of a trilateral agreement between Lebanon, Israel, and the US on the 26th of June in Washington. This should stand as a first step towards a comprehensive and just peace in accordance with the previously outlined principles. We unwaveringly support the work of UNIFIL. We have been present in that mission for 20 years with a sizable contingent. We recognize the fundamental role played by the Blue Helmets. We condemn the unacceptable attacks against mission personnel, and we express our sincere condolences to following recent events. A comprehensive investigation into these deaths must be conducted, and all such attacks are a violation of international law. We'll welcome the options presented by the Secretary-General for the implementation of 1701 once UNIFIL's mandate concludes. We will continue working actively with TCCs and PCCs and Security Council members to guarantee an orderly transition and to contribute to efforts underway to ensure stability down the blue line following UNIFIL's withdrawal. On Syria, we stand at a critical juncture for the country and its people, together with the challenge of rebuilding and buttressing legitimate and democratic institutions after decades of conflict. Concerns remain alongside internal and external pressure. There's also a serious humanitarian crisis, and there is a complex geopolitical situation at play at a regional level with security concerns also. We support a peaceful and inclusive political transition process, one which guarantees the full respect for the independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria, and we will continue working with the transitional government of Syria in this regard. I wish to underscore that the regional context in the Middle East is today a devastating one. We cannot turn away from it or let us be distracted by other issues. The Security Council must act and must do so urgently. Member states of the United Nations have a responsibility and indeed the moral obligation to use all means at our disposal to achieve the restoration of peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you. I thank the representative of Spain for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Madam President, despite the declared ceasefire, Gaza remains devastated and under siege. Israel, the occupying regime, continues to violate the ceasefire through ongoing military attacks and severe restriction on humanitarian access. It is further deepening the suffering of civilians. At the same time, the Israeli regime continues its illegal settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank, in clear violation of international law and relevant United Nations resolutions. Israel's repeated acts of aggression against Lebanon and continued violations of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity further threaten regional peace and security. The continued unlawful actions of the Israeli regime pose a grave threat to international peace and security. Against this backdrop, Iran reiterates that any credible solution must ensure a permanent ceasefire, unhindered humanitarian access, the full withdrawal of Israeli occupying forces, and full UN membership for the State of Palestine. Humanitarian assistance and Gaza's reconstruction must never be conditioned on political or military objectives. Accountability is indispensable. The Israeli regime, together with those that enable this regime for its atrocious crimes through political, military, and economic support, must be held responsible for grave violations of international humanitarian law. The issuance of arrest warrants by the ICC on 21st November 2024 against the criminal Prime Minister of the Israeli regime for the commission of war crimes and crimes against humanity is a clear reminder that no one is above international law. Madam President, I must also respond to the baseless allegations leveled against my country, particularly by the representative of the United States. I categorically reject all those unfounded and politically motivated accusations. The representative of the United States has once again restored to lies, disinformation, and a campaign of distortion in a desperate attempt to justify the United States' unlawful acts of aggression against Iran. These allegations are part of the long-standing hostile policy pursued by the United States and the Israeli regime against Iran to advance their political and military objectives, conceal their unlawful actions and malicious activities in the region, and justify the U.S. destabilizing military presence in the region. However, the facts are clear and cannot be denied. The United States is the aggressor. Through its acts of aggression against Iran, the United States has violated the Charter of the United Nations and fundamental principles of international law, including the peremptory prohibition on the use of force and the prohibition of aggression. By deliberately targeting civilian and civilian infrastructure, including schools, hospitals, medical facilities, bridges, sport facilities, and other essential infrastructure, the United States has committed grave violations of international humanitarian law, including war crimes. The attacks on the Minab school is a tragic and undeniable example of those crimes. The The President of the United States and other senior officials have openly acknowledged the commission of these heinous crimes and have even expressed pride in them. Such statements constitute further evidence of their responsibility. The United States bears full international responsibility for its internationally wrongful acts. Those who are responsible for these grave crimes will sooner or later face accountability before competent international judicial bodies. No one is above international law, and there will be no impunity. The international community and the Security Council must not allow these crimes to be normalized. Silence and impunity will only encourage their repetition. Madam President, in conclusion, we reiterate that all Iran's measures are defensive, necessary, and consistent with international law. The root causes of the current situation are clear. United States' ongoing unlawful actions pose a serious threat to regional stability, freedom of navigation, and the security of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. The Islamic Republic of Iran has exercised and will continue to exercise its inherent right of self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations to protect its people and to defend and safeguard its sovereignty, territorial integrity, and vital national interests against U.S. acts of aggression. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Poland.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank the Democratic Republic of the Congo for convening this timely debate on the situation in the Middle East. Madam President, we are deeply concerned with the recent escalation of the situation in the Persian Gulf. Once again, the current events demonstrate that energy security and freedom of navigation must remain central to the resolution of the conflict and regional peace solution. In that context, we are concerned with the Houthis' ability to threaten fragile balance of maritime traffic in the Red Sea. With that in mind, we note with interest that the decision taken by the countries in the region to develop alternative strategic transport and energy corridors, including oil and gas pipelines, as well as the railway networks, in anticipation that the long-term operation of the Strait of Hormuz will remain subject to the periodic disruptions. We remain equally concerned by the growing use of disinformation and the continued targeting of civilian infrastructure, trends that have come to define contemporary conflicts from the Middle East to Ukraine. Madam President, this state of no peace, no war cannot endure indefinitely. Geography cannot change, but political choices can, and meaningful dialogue remains the only path to lasting resolution. Poland commends the efforts of all mediators and remains firmly committed to supporting diplomatic de-escalation. Two issues remain central: the full opening of the Strait of Hormuz and control over Iran's nuclear program, requiring full Iranian cooperation with the IAEA and compliance with the NPT and the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement. Let me repeat, nuclear safety, maritime security, and freedom of navigation remain essential to international stability. Madam President, recognition of the Palestinian people's aspiration for statehood and support for the two-state solution remain key elements of Poland's Middle East policy, consistently reflected in our voting at the UN and grounded in the New York Declaration of September 2025. In this context, Poland shares the international community's alarm over escalating tensions in the West Bank. We urge Israel to protect civilians, ensure unhindered humanitarian access, and hold perpetrators accountable. We also oppose death penalty in all circumstances and called on Israel to maintain its moratorium on executions. Poland remains gravely concerned by the actions targeting UNRWA, whose work is indispensable for millions of refugees. More broadly, Madam President, let me underline that the protection of civilians remains a matter of the highest importance for Poland. We call for full respect for international humanitarian law and for holding accountable all those responsible for its violation, including attacks on humanitarian personnel. This issue carries particular weight for us. In April 2024, a Polish citizen was among the World Central Kitchen volunteers killed in an attack in Gaza. We once again demand an immediate and full end to attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure and safe and unhindered humanitarian access everywhere, whether in the Middle East, in Africa, or in Ukraine. Madam President, our commitment extends beyond words. Before I conclude, allow me to highlight Poland's humanitarian and development support for the region. Poland actively supports humanitarian projects through Polish aid, NGOs, and various UN agencies, with particular focus on initiatives implemented in Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria. Our priorities include strengthening local resilience by ensuring access to healthcare, mostly through mobile clinics, supporting local entrepreneurship, reinforcing local administration and civil defense, enhancing preparedness and response to natural disasters, and expanding access to renewable energy. Our commitment to the people of this region remains steadfast. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Poland for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bulgaria.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bulgaria remains deeply concerned by the continuing instability across the Middle East and its serious implications for regional and international peace and security. In this regard, Bulgaria expresses its strong support for the efforts of High Representative Nikolai Mladenov and the Board of Peace toward the implementation of the Comprehensive Plan and Security Council Resolution 2803. We welcome the office's efforts to support the implementation of the ceasefire arrangement, facilitate effective governance, advance recovery and reconstruction in Gaza, and coordinate international efforts in support of the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. Strengthening this mechanism remains essential to translating political commitment into tangible results on the ground. We underline the importance of the permanent disarmament of Hamas and no other non-state armed groups. Hamas cannot be part of the future governance of Gaza. We join the call for immediate, safe and unimpeded access and sustained distribution of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza. The deterioration of the situation in the West Bank, including the increase in settler violence and settlement activities, is a source of serious concern and need to be addressed. Bulgaria remains committed to a comprehensive, just and lasting peace based on two-state solution in accordance with the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, whereby two democratic states, Israel and Palestine, live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. On Lebanon, we welcome the trilateral framework agreement signed by Lebanon, Israel and the United States in Washington on 26th of June, which offers an important opportunity to advance de-escalation, restore Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and move towards more sustainable security arrangements. The situation in Lebanon nevertheless remains fragile. The full disarmament of Hezbollah and other non-state armed groups remain essential for lasting peace and security. Bulgaria reaffirms its support for Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as for the efforts of the Lebanese authorities to strengthen the Lebanese armed forces and extend state authority throughout the whole Lebanese territory. The implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701 in its entirety continued to be of key importance. With regard to Syria, Bulgaria remains firmly committed to supporting a peaceful and inclusive Syrian-led and Syrian-owned transition that upholds human rights and guarantees the participation of all Syrians without distinction. For this transition to succeed, Syria must be insulated from regional hostilities. We call on all external actors to fully respect Syria's sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity. On Iran, we express cautious hope that the halt in military strikes will create a new window for a ceasefire that could pave the way for the resumption of diplomatic engagement, with the aim of reopening the Strait of Hormuz in accordance with international law and ultimately reaching a negotiated solution to the outstanding issues related to Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Bulgaria is concerned that the periodic resumption of military escalation between the United States and Iran increases the unpredictability of the situation and the risk of miscalculation, and calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint. We condemn the unilateral attacks on Iran against countries in the region, as well as the disruption of transit passage through the Strait of Hormuz. We underline the need to fully ensure freedom of navigation, as well as free and safe passage of vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, as reflected in UNCLOS. We also underline the importance of safeguarding maritime routes and freedom of navigation throughout the wider region, including the Red Sea and the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. The recent threats by the Houthis are unacceptable and must be categorically rejected. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Bulgaria for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Arab Emirates. Madam President, we welcome the efforts you made to organize this important debate, and we also thank Mr. Rami Al-Akbar for his very enriching briefing. In light of the recent developments in Gaza and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory, the United Arab Emirates would like to emphasize the following points. First, progress must be made towards the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 2803, including consolidating the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, ensuring Hamas's disarmament, creating the conditions necessary for the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza to begin its work, and expediting the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, but also through a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and enabling the Palestinian Authority, after the necessary reform, to assume its full responsibilities in both Gaza and the West Bank. We reject any attempt to displace the Palestinian people or to create new realities on the ground in Gaza, which would undermine the prospects of peace. Second, despite the relative improvement in food security indicators in the Gaza Strip, the humanitarian situation remains critical. Persistent food security persists. Nearly 70% of the population lack adequate shelter, and water and sanitation services continue to deteriorate. We therefore stress the need to reopen all crossings to ensure the flow of humanitarian assistance and to support recovery. We continue to provide humanitarian assistance, in particular through Operation Chivalrous Night 3, alongside other initiatives such as projects to combat rodents and pests, to reduce epidemic risks, but also by organizing collective weddings and taking care of excellent students, and we do this in partnership with the United Nations. Third, we strongly condemn the dangerous developments in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, in particular increased settlement activities and unilateral measures, including the E1 plan, the demolition orders in Khan al-Ahmar, and land settlement measures in Area C. We also condemn the dangerous escalation in settler violence and attacks against civilians, villages, holy sites, and property. We call on the Israeli government to hold perpetrators of these violations accountable and to prevent the cycle of hatred and instability from deepening. We also reject any attempt to change the historic and legal status quo in Jerusalem and holy sites. We reaffirm the special role of the historic Hashemite custodianship. In conclusion, the United Arab Emirates, as a member of the board of Peace and the Gaza Coordination Council, we reiterate our full commitment to supporting the implementation of the comprehensive plan and the efforts made by the High Representative for Gaza and the roadmap he has put forward. These efforts should proceed in parallel with initiatives aimed at advancing the two-state solution, independent and sovereign Palestinian state with East Jerusalem, its capital, living side by side with Israel in peace and security. I thank the UAE for the statement. I now give the floor to Malaysia.
Madam President, Malaysia thanks the Democratic Republic of the Congo for convening this quarterly open debate. We also thank Mr. Alakbarov for his comprehensive briefing. We align ourselves with the statements of the OIC and NAM. Madam President, the situation across the occupied Palestinian territory continues to deteriorate at an alarming pace. In the Gaza Strip, the humanitarian situation remains dire. UNICEF estimates that 1.9 million of Gaza's 2.1 million people remain displaced, many of them repeatedly. Continued hostilities, restrictions on humanitarian access, and severe damage to civilian infrastructure continue to impede the delivery of life-saving assistance. These conditions limit the Palestinians' access to food, safe water, sanitation, shelter, and health care. Israel's aggression extends beyond the Gaza Strip. The situation in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is also worsening. Civilians, including children, have been killed not only by Israeli forces but also settlers. Israeli military operations, movement restrictions on Palestinians, demolitions of home and civilian infrastructure, the expansion of illegal Israeli settlement and settler violence in the occupied West Bank continue to drive displacement, isolate communities, and restrict access to essential services and livelihoods. Palestinian children are increasingly being denied safe access to education. Across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, 84 schools remain under pending demolition or stop work orders, including 54 that are facing full demolition. These violations must end. Israel must uphold its obligations under international law and international humanitarian law, including by protecting Palestinian children, schools, and other civilian infrastructure. These children deserve their right to education and must be protected from harm. Madam President, Malaysia reaffirms the indispensable role of UNRWA. The International Court of Justice Advisory Opinion of 22nd October 2025 and General Assembly Resolution 80/116 clearly call upon Israel to facilitate humanitarian relief efforts undertaken by UN entities, including UNRWA, for the civilian population without obstruction. They further call for the protection of all humanitarian and medical personnel and reaffirm the inviolability of United Nations premises and property, as well as the privileges and immunities of its officials. In this connection, Malaysia categorically rejects any attempt to obstruct, delegitimize, or dismantle UNRWA's operations or to undermine its mandate. UNRWA remains an indispensable lifeline for millions of Palestine refugees across the Middle East. Any effort to weaken the agency is legally indefensible and morally unacceptable. Madam President, Malaysia remains steadfast in its support for the inherent and inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination, right of return, and the right to statehood. Malaysia reiterates its unwavering and principled support for the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. We recall the New York Declaration adopted by an overwhelming majority of member states, Malaysia among them. The declaration demonstrates the international community's collective commitment to translate the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people into concrete political action and to advance a credible and irreversible pathway towards Palestinian statehood. Madam President, to conclude, accountability for Israel's unlawful actions against the Palestinian people must remain a priority. Accountability is the foundation of justice, a safeguard against the repetition of atrocities, and a necessary condition for a just and lasting peace. This Council must not allow the sufferings of the Palestinian people to remain unanswered, nor their lives to be reduced to statistics. It must act with courage and consistency to uphold international law and to bring impunity to an end. The Palestinian people deserve justice, dignity, and freedom. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malaysia for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Tunisia. Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Democratic Republic of the Congo for convening this meeting, and we would like to express our support to you as you discharge your functions presiding over the Council. As we've already said on many occasions, a tragic situation in the Middle East is a direct result of the failure of the international community to restore its inalienable rights to the Palestinian people throughout their territory. We call on the international community to address the violations committed by the occupying power and to assume their political and moral responsibility in the maintenance of international peace and security in order to assure the enforcement of international law, in particular international humanitarian law. We reaffirm our support to the vital role played by UNRWA in providing relief for Palestinian refugees and its outstanding contribution to regional stability. The international community has to continue providing political and financial support to UNRWA and reject any attempts to detract from their mandate. In conclusion, we reiterate our unconditional support for the Palestinian people as they fight to defend their inalienable rights, in particular the right to self-determination. We support our Palestinian brothers in their self-determination, their struggle for the full restoration of their rights and the establishment of their state on the entire territory of Palestine, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. I thank Tunisia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Portugal.
Merci, Madame President. Starting with the Gulf, Portugal calls for the full implementation of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. We urge all relevant parties to uphold international law, including international humanitarian law and freedom of navigation. Portugal supports a diplomatic solution as the only viable path to a comprehensive and long-lasting peace. The same applies to Yemen. Turning to Lebanon, we welcome the trilateral framework agreement and highlight the importance of its implementation in the context of existing UN Security Council resolutions, including 1701. We believe the UN should continue to having a role post-UNIFIL. Concerning Syria, Portugal welcomes the inaugural session of the People's Assembly and the recent visit by the Secretary-General of the United Nations, both of which mark significant milestones in the country's political transition. Regarding Palestine, the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains grievous. Portugal calls for the full implementation of the comprehensive plan. We stress that the UN and all its agencies, including UNRWA, as well as international NGOs, must be able to fulfill their roles. Violations of the ceasefire must stop. Furthermore, the Palestinian Authority should be involved in preparation for its return to the Strip. In the West Bank and East Jerusalem, Portugal is concerned by the surge in settlers' violence and Israel's unilateral actions aimed at increasing its control over the occupied Palestinian territory, including the expanding settlements, which are illegal under international law. We also condemn actions pertaining to alter the status quo of holy sites. Portugal formally recognized the State of Palestine 1 year ago and remains committed to the implementation of the two-state solution and to promote a just and lasting peace in the Middle East in line with the New York Declaration. Madam President, Portugal remains convinced that diplomacy is possible, dialogue is necessary, and peace is achievable. This is the spirit that will guide us as we will serve as elected members of the Security Council in 27 and 28. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Portugal for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Canada.
Madam President, Canada remains deeply concerned by the ongoing conflict with Iran. We reiterate the need to work towards a diplomatic resolution to the conflict and support efforts by Pakistan and Qatar and other regional partners towards the resumption of negotiations. Canada urges all parties to ensure the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We condemn in the strongest terms Iran's strikes against Gulf states, Jordan, and other partners in the region. We stand firmly in support of our Gulf partners' sovereignty and security and commend their ongoing efforts towards dialogue and de-escalation. Canada will continue to pressure Iran to end its malign behavior. To this end, we have imposed sanctions on a total of 227 Iranian individuals and 260 entities. These sanctions address concerns related to Iran's abhorrent human rights abuses, nuclear program, its funding of proxy terrorist groups, and the transfer of UAV and drone technology to malign actors. Canada is equally concerned by the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, where the continued disruption of maritime security poses a serious threat to our economies and overall security, including critical supply chains. Canada calls on Iran to respect navigation rights and safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz in line with international law. Canada is working with partners towards restoring maritime security and safe navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, and we stand ready to support proposed French and UK initiatives. We are also concerned by the recent Houthi threats against Saudi Arabia, including to disrupt the lawful passage of vessels in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait must remain open and safe for international navigation, free from attacks or interference in accordance with international law. Canada welcomes initial steps taken under the Trilateral Framework Agreement, including the recent deployment of the Lebanese armed forces in areas of southern Lebanon, and encourages the continued implementation of commitments by all parties. We reiterate the importance of full respect for Lebanon's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the commitments undertaken by all parties in accordance with international law and relevant UN Security Council resolutions, including 1701. We also welcome efforts by the Lebanese authorities to extend state authority throughout Lebanese territory and encourage continued progress on the reforms necessary to support Lebanon's long-term stability and recovery. Canada remains concerned by ongoing security incidents affecting civilians and civilian infrastructure and by the threats to the safety and security of UNIFIL personnel. We underscore that peacekeepers must be able to carry out their mandated tasks safely and without interference.
We should not lose sight of the immense suffering of civilians in Gaza or the humanitarian crisis which continues despite the ceasefire. We in Canada have committed themselves to provide more than $500 million in international assistance in 2023, and we reiterate our appeal for a greater humanitarian access. We condemn terrorist attacks by Hamas in Israel on the 7th of October 2023, which took the life of about
stability and peace, and to enhance economic and investment opportunities. In this context, we welcome the positive developments in Syria, whose stability contributes to Lebanon's stability, and vice versa. A joint high committee was established, and coordination is ongoing between the two states on border security and anti-smuggling efforts. Cooperation across various fields continues to grow. This cooperation is based on equality. We aim to launch vital trade and economic projects that benefit both countries. We reaffirm our steadfast position of solidarity with Arab Gulf states and Jordan in the aftermath of the unjustified Iranian attacks against them. In light of the recent escalation, we condemn these attacks, which undermine security and stability in the region. Madam President, the situation in Gaza remains difficult and unacceptable. Civilians continue to suffer from destruction, displacement, and deprivation. The international community cannot stand idly by, particularly as the ceasefire is being violated. In the occupied West Bank, settler terrorism has escalated sharply, in full view of the occupying forces, and indeed with their encouragement and, in many instances, their protection. The reality is that stability and lasting peace cannot be achieved without ending the illegal occupation of Palestinian territories and without the full implementation of international law, particularly the resolutions adopted by this Council. A peaceful settlement must be based on well-established parameters. It must respect the rights of the Palestinian people and must lead to the establishment of an independent Palestinian state. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Lebanon for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Madam President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has the honor to take the floor on behalf of the Group of Friends in defense of the Charter of the United Nations. The Group of Friends reaffirms its commitment to the rightful cause of the Palestinian people. We express our unwavering solidarity with their legitimate aspirations to fully exercise their inalienable rights, including the right to self-determination, to freedom, and to live in peace and security. These principles are non-negotiable. Indeed, they are the very foundation of the international order that we have all agreed to defend. The situation in the occupied Palestinian territory continues to worsen at an alarming pace. Recent reports presented to this Council describe a context marked by continued military operation, the destruction of critical infrastructure, and the devastating impact all of this is having on the civilian population. Hospitals, schools, humanitarian facilities, and housing have been gravely affected. That has wrought suffering that no community should ever be forced to endure. Many bodies of the United Nations have in Palestine documented grave violations of international law, of international humanitarian law, and of the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter. The continuation of these violations undermines the credibility of the multilateral system and the capacity of this organization to discharge its mandate, that is, to maintain international peace and security. The Group of Friends is of the view that the Security Council must act in accordance with all of the relevant resolutions adopted on this matter. We believe that it must do so impartially and with resolve in order to avoid loss of human life, guarantee the protection of Palestinian civilians, and to guarantee safe, comprehensive and unfettered access to humanitarian assistance. We firmly support the work of the UN on the ground, in particular that of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. Their work remains vital for millions of Palestine refugees. Its humanitarian work, conducted in compliance with the mandate entrusted to it by the General Assembly, must receive sustained support to which no political conditions must be attached. The continuation of its operations is vital for regional stability and vital to preserve the dignity of those that depend on its services. The recent report of the Undersecretary General emphasizes the fact that even after the ceasefire, the Palestinian people continue to face incredibly difficult conditions: new deaths, mass displacement, and confinement to ever-shrinking strips of land with very limited access to essential services. These circumstances are incompatible with regional stability and with the humanitarian principles that that the United Nations is called upon to defend. A significant step towards peace would be to move forward with Palestine's admission as a full-fledged member of the United Nations. Legal and political equality are the linchpin of a genuine and sustainable peace. Peace requires that all parties be able to participate in dialogue on an equal footing and in a climate of mutual respect. It also requires that all are held accountable on the basis of obligations under international law. Equality is not a privilege. It is a vital prerequisite to resolve a conflict which has already raged on for too many decades. Madam President, there can be no lasting peace while occupation, annexation, and the very negotiation of fundamental rights continue. Peace demands respect for human dignity, respect for international law, for international humanitarian law, and for the right of peoples to self-determination. These principles are not abstract concepts, rather they are the very foundation of any viable and sustainable political solution. In accordance with the aforementioned, the group of friends reiterates its commitment to continue working to ensure the full exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to an independent sovereign state. There can be no peace in the Middle East without a just, comprehensive and lasting solution to the Palestinian question, a solution rooted in international law and the relevant resolutions of this organization. We appeal for the establishment of a sovereign, viable Palestinian state on the basis of pre-1967 lines, with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with international law, the relevant resolutions of the United Nations, and the two-state solution. Here we must guarantee the right of return of Palestinian refugees in accordance with relevant UN resolution. The group of friends reaffirms that the UN Charter continues to stand as our collective guide. Upholding the Charter is not optional. It is the very prerequisite for the peaceful coexistence of states and for the protection of all peoples throughout the world. Allow me now, in my national capacity, to add a number of brief comments. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, faithful to the very tenets of its diplomacy of peace, reiterates its appeal for dialogue and restraint, with a view to achieving a comprehensive, just and lasting solution to the Palestinian question. This situation remains at the very core of the Arab-Israeli conflict. We call for an end to any unilateral actions liable to render yet more complex realities on the ground, and liable also to delay the implementation of a genuine political process between the parties. It is urgent to preserve international maritime security, including in the Red Sea, to guarantee the security of the civilian population, and to make progress with achieving the legitimate aspirations of all peoples of the Middle East, calling for a future of peace, justice, and well-being. Thank you. I thank the representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
Madam President, Vietnam remains deeply concerned about the ongoing situation in the Middle East, including the renewed hostilities and the risk of their further spread across the globe. The fact that maritime security and freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz have yet to be restored, continued hostilities and restrictions on humanitarian access in Gaza, the worsening situation in the West Bank, and the deterioration of security in southern Lebanon. These developments are causing immense human suffering, disrupting international trade and energy supplies, heightening regional and global uncertainties, undermining the implementations of City Council Resolution 2803 and the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict, and jeopardizing the prospects for negotiated settlement between the US and Iran. We regret that the City Council has not been able to take united, balanced, and impartial action to address this pressing crisis and their serious implications for regional and international peace and security. We are especially alarmed by attacks against civilian infrastructure. Under all circumstances, civilians and critical civilian infrastructure must be protected. Such attacks constitute violations of international law and relevant UN resolutions, including Security Council Resolution 2573 in 2021. Vietnam underscores that maritime safety and security, as well as freedom of navigation and overflights, must be upheld in accordance with international law, particularly the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. This is essential not only for stability in the Middle East, especially in and around the Strait of Hormuz, but also for safeguarding global energy supplies, food security, and economic stability. Madam President, There can be no military solution to the conflicts in the Middle East. Vietnam welcomes all mediation and facilitation efforts aimed at de-escalating tensions, ending hostilities, consolidating ceasefire, and advancing balanced, constructive, and mutually acceptable solutions. In this regard, Vietnam welcomes the resumption of negotiations between the United States and Iran aimed at resolving their differences and ending the conflict. We commend the tireless efforts of Pakistan, Qatar, Oman, Turkey, Switzerland, and other mediators to maintain channels of communications and facilitate the negotiating process. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, engage constructively, and implement the agreements reached in good faith. Vietnam also called on the international community not to allow recent developments in the Middle East to overshadow the Palestinian questions. We reaffirm our unwavering support for the legitimate and inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and for the State of Palestine's full membership in the UN. We remain steadfast in supporting the two-state solutions based on the pre-1967 borders in accordance with international law and relevant UN resolutions. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Madam President. Your Excellencies, the situation in Palestine, one of the gravest crises confronting the international community, has reached a point where euphemisms and diplomacy caution no longer suffice. Recent developments in Gaza, including what we all have chosen to label as a ceasefire, do not resemble any ceasefire recognized under international law. When civilians continue to face brutality, when humanitarian access remains obstructed, and when the occupying power retains full coercive control, we must call this situation what it is: a pause defined by the perpetrators, not by the protection and needs of the civilians, or of the victims. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains catastrophic and depicts the predictable outcome of sustained destruction, displacement, and deprivation. Children are suffering from trauma. Families are living amid rubble. Disease is spreading. The world should not remain insensitive to this human tragedy. Behind every statistics are real people, families, and communities whose lives have been profoundly affected. Namibia stresses that humanitarian assistance must flow unhindered, at scale, and without political interference. UNRWA must be allowed to operate fully and safely. Attempts to delegitimize or restrict its work or actions that exacerbate human suffering and undermine the international system's ability to respond. In the same vein, we want to reiterate that reconstruction of Gaza should not be a distant aspiration. It is an immediate necessity. The people of Gaza cannot be condemned to live indefinitely amongst the ruins of their homes, schools, hospitals, and places of worship. A credible reconstruction effort requires sustained international support, adequate resources, and the removal of all barriers. Madam President, Namibia is deeply outraged by recent reports of deliberate violence against Palestinian children, including killing and sexual violence attributed to Israeli forces. These acts constitute some of the gravest violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. Children must never be targets of conflict. Namibia demands independent investigations and full accountability of all perpetrators without exception and without political shielding. The same should apply to the situation in the West Bank, where the illegal expansion of settlements continues unabated. These actions violate international law, undermine the viability of a two-state solution, and fuel tensions and instability across the Middle East. They are a deliberate attempt to undermine political outcomes on the ground. Madam President, the recent 2026 UN OIC conference on the question of Jerusalem, held in Cairo, Egypt, reaffirmed that Jerusalem remains central to the Palestinian question and any viable peace process. Consistent with its outcome, Namibia reiterates that East Jerusalem is an integral part of the occupied Palestinian territory. The state of Jerusalem cannot be determined through unilateral measures or fait accompli on the ground, but through justice, dialogue, and a steadfast commitment to the rules-based international order, including the right to self-determination. The international momentum behind Palestinian statehood has never been clearer today. And today, the state of Palestine is recognized by a record number of countries, reflecting the international community's growing acknowledgement that Palestinian statehood is legitimate, necessary, and overdue. Namibia therefore calls on this Council to shoulder its responsibility by reflecting the overwhelming international consensus. The credibility of this Council is being tested. Selective norms, persistent inaction to stop genocide and atrocities, crimes in the Gaza Strip and war crimes in the West Bank, and the failure to enforce its own resolutions erode multilateralism. Namibia urges the Council to act with consistency and courage. We remain firmly committed to contributing to restore peace and hope for the Palestinian people and a region that have endured for too much, for too long. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Namibia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Iraq.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the member states belonging to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in my capacity as acting chair of the group. At the outset, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to the Democratic Republic of Congo for convening this quarterly open debate and for the comprehensive briefing provided to the Council. Madam President, the Palestinian people have continued to suffer untold hardship and tragedies in Gaza and elsewhere in the occupied Palestinian territory, in flagrant violation of the international law and international humanitarian law. Israel continues to attack children and families and damage civilian infrastructure, dwelling homes, schools, and places of worship. It is extremely disappointing to witness that humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, settlers' violence in the West Bank, and Israeli measures aimed at changing the demographic, religious, and cultural character of East Jerusalem continues unabated. More devastating are the obnoxious Israeli policies which have denied humanitarian supplies to the displaced people of Gaza and other cities in the occupied Palestinian territory. To this end, the humanitarian operation of UNRWA continues to face obstruction by the Israeli Authority through illegal and punitive measures, including the demolition of agencies' facilities in occupied Al-Quds al-Sharif, in contradiction with Israeli obligations under international law, the UN Charter, the UN Convention of Privileges and Immunities, relevant resolutions, and ICJ's advisory opinion of July 2024 and October 2025. We call for the immediate implementation of Extent Peace Agreement, which provides for unfettered access to the belligerent people of Palestinian occupied territory. Palestinian natural resources have intensified an unprecedented financial crisis. Israel must release all unlawful withheld Palestinian tax revenues, cease the exploitation of Palestinian natural resources, and provide full repatriation to the damage caused by its illegal measures. Madam President, the OIC Group reiterates that lasting peace in the Middle East requires Israel's complete withdrawal from all occupied Arab territories, including the occupied Syrian Arab Golan Heights, and the full compliance with the Security Council Resolution 242, 338, 497. We condemn Israel's incursion into Syrian territory since 8th of December 24 in violation of international law, the UN Charter, and 1974 disengagement agreement. The OIC Group welcomes the trilateral framework of June 26, 2026 between Lebanon and the United States of America and Israel. The group emphasizes the imperative of Israel's full compliance with the ceasefire, the cessation of all military attacks against Lebanon, its immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal from all Lebanese territory. Ensuring the return of forceful displacement Lebanese to their homes. The group further calls for the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. It further reiterates its steadfast position in support of the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and unity of Lebanon. The group strongly condemns the repeated Israeli attacks against civilians, including women and children, journalists, medical staff, the Red Cross, the civilian infrastructure. It further condemns attacks against the Lebanese armed forces, the state institutions, as well as the large-scale destruction and symmetrical demolition of Lebanese towns and villages, and the establishment of so-called security zone, all of which constitute a flagrant violation of international law, including international humanitarian law. The OIC Group reaffirms its support for the Lebanese state in assessing its control and sovereignty over all Lebanese territory, including the exclusive authority of the state over decisions of war and peace, its monopoly on the possessions of and use of arms, and the disarmament of all non-state actors, as well as advancing its reform agenda. The group underscores the urgent need to scale up humanitarian assistance to Lebanon to address the growing needs of affected civilians, as well as the enhanced support for the Lebanese armed forces. The group also strongly condemns the attack on UNIFIL personnel and premises, and stresses the need to ensure accountability for all such attacks. In conclusion, the OIC Group reiterates its call on the Security Council to support the Palestinian people in their just struggle for the recovery and exercise of their national rights, including the right to return and the realization of an independent for the State of Palestine on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Iraq for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Madam President. 8 months since the adoption of Resolution 2803, the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire. Millions of Palestinians remain displaced, and more than 1,100 have been killed since the October ceasefire, with thousands more injured. We must end this suffering. That's why Australia supported President Trump's peace plan and Resolution 2803, which presents the most viable route available to end the suffering in Gaza and to bring stability. Improved humanitarian access is a fundamental part of that plan, but the suffering in Gaza continues to be exacerbated by unnecessary impediments and restrictions on humanitarian aid. These restrictions must be lifted. Border crossings must be fully opened to allow aid to flow unimpeded to those in need, and UN agencies and NGOs must be allowed to perform their vital work. Humanitarian workers must be respected and protected in line with international law and the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel. Australia is proud to play a role in assisting Palestinians in need, and we commend the extraordinary efforts of humanitarian organisations delivering vital services in difficult conditions. The Australian government recently announced new support for recovery in Gaza, including $15 million to the UN Horizon Fund. Madam President, a two-state solution has always been the only pathway to enduring peace and security for both Israel and Palestine. That is why Australia recognised the state of Palestine almost a year ago as part of coordinated international efforts to build momentum towards achieving this goal. Strengthened Palestinian institutions are essential to advancing a two-state solution, and that's why we're working with partners to bolster the institutional foundations of Palestine, including by supporting reforms to governance and public institutions and promoting economic development. This includes a $10 million contribution to the World Bank's Palestinian Fund for Reconstruction and Development to strengthen the Palestinian Authority's public financial management. Madam President, Australia opposes all actions that risk fueling further violence and instability. We remain unequivocal in our condemnation of Hamas, including for its atrocities on October 7, 2023, and its ongoing acts of terror. Hamas must disarm and play no role in the governance of Palestine. In the West Bank, Israel's expansion of illegal settlements continues to present a major obstacle to peace. It has been accompanied by unprecedented levels of settler violence. Australia recently joined partners to impose further sanctions on violent settlers and related entities for their serious human rights abuses against Palestinians. Israel must hold perpetrators of settler violence to account and must cease ongoing settlement activity. Altering the demographic composition of Palestine is unacceptable. Achieving lasting peace also requires stability beyond Gaza and beyond the West Bank. The dire situation in Lebanon is creating serious humanitarian impacts. We welcome the trilateral efforts by Lebanon, Israel, and the United States to support enduring peace and stability in the region. We want to see a durable end to the conflict, Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity respected, and Hezbollah disarmed in line with Resolution 1701. Australia has long called for de-escalation and an end to the Middle East conflict. The longer that these wars go on, the greater the regional and global costs. We want to see negotiations between the United States and Iran continue, the ceasefire to resume, and for the Strait of Hormuz and other vital trade corridors in the region to be kept open. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Australia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Uganda.
Madam President, I'm honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the 121 member states of the non-aligned movement. I congratulate you, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, upon the accession to the presidency of the Security Council this month, and express appreciation for granting NAM the opportunity to present its position on the question of Palestine. NAM reaffirms its long-standing, common and principled position on the question of Palestine, and is deeply concerned about the implications of this historic injustice against the people of Palestine, and most critically in the Gaza Strip, where the civilian population continues to suffer from the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe inflicted on it by Israel, the occupying power. NAM supports all prospects for a just solution to this historic injustice and for peace and security in the region. NAM condemns in the strongest terms all these illegal practices and all forms of violence, particularly Israeli military attacks and Israel collective punishment against the Palestinian people, as grave breaches of international law, including humanitarian and human rights law. The killing and injury of more than 244,600 Palestinian civilians in Gaza, the majority of whom as children and women, as well as medical personnel, humanitarian workers and journalists, is an indictment to the mandate of the UN Security Council. NAM demands an immediate and complete cessation of all forms of armed hostilities, violent repression, and illegal Israeli practices, policies against the Palestinian people and other nations in the region. The members of the United Nations conferred on the Security Council the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security in accordance with Articles 12 and 24 of the Charter. The Security Council must uphold its mandate to maintain international peace and security and must act to implement its own resolutions as provided for in the UN Charter. We call on the UN Security Council to uphold its responsibilities and to act forthwith for the full implementation of all its resolutions pertaining to the question of Palestine, including its most recent resolutions, namely 2334 of 2016, 2712 of 2023, 2720 of 2023, 2728 of 2024, 2735 of 2024, and 2803 of 2025, adopted following the ceasefire agreement. The non-aligned movement welcomed the trilateral framework of June 26, 2026 between Lebanon and the United States of America and Israel. The movement emphasized the importance of Israel's full compliance with the ceasefire and the cessation of all military attacks against Lebanon. It is immediate, complete, and unconditional withdrawal from all Lebanese territory, ensure the return of forcibly displaced Lebanese to their homes. The movement further calls for the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. It further reiterates its steadfast position in support of the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity and unity of Lebanon. The movement strongly condemns the repeated Israeli attacks against civilians, including women and children, journalists, medical staff, the Red Cross, civilian infrastructure. It further condemns attacks against Lebanese armed forces and state institutions, as well as the large-scale destruction and systematic demolition of Lebanese towns and villages and establishment of so-called security zones, all of which constitute flagrant violation of international law, including international humanitarian law. The movement reaffirms its support for the Lebanese state in asserting its control and sovereignty over all Lebanese territory, including the exclusive authority of the state over decisions of war and peace. It is a monopoly on the possession and use of arms and the disarmament of all non-state actors, as well as advancing its reform agenda. The movement underscores the urgent need to scale up humanitarian assistance to Lebanon to address the growing needs of affected civilians, as well as to enhance support for the Lebanese armed forces. The movement also strongly condemns the attacks of UNIFIL personnel and premises and stresses the need to ensure accountability for all such attacks. NAM condemns Israeli incursions into the Syrian territory as a flagrant violation of international law, UN Charter 1974 Disengagement Agreement, and calls on the Security Council to exert pressure on Israel to fully withdraw from all Syrian territories. NAM condemns the repeated Israeli attacks against the Syrian Arab Republic as they constitute a clear aggression against a sovereign state and a flagrant violation of the provision of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. The non-aligned movement welcomes the New York Declaration arising out of the high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine and the implementation of two-state solution as a reaffirmation of the unwavering international commitment to a just and peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine. The movement calls for the necessary coordination and cooperation among all states to advance the declaration's objectives to mobilize international efforts at the political, economic, financial, legal, and security levels to foster momentum by building on national, regional, and international initiatives aimed at achieving a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace and realizing the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. NAM welcomes the recognition of the state of Palestine by a majority of countries and calls on the United Nations Security Council to urgently recommend the admission of Palestine as a full member of the United Nations in respect of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination as a long overdue commitment to lasting peace in the Middle East. To conclude, Madam President, the movement seizes this opportunity to reiterate its call for collective international efforts to uphold international law, to end historic and grave injustice against the Palestinian people. Now, member states reaffirm their commitment to promoting a just, lasting, comprehensive, and peaceful resolution to the question of Palestine in all its aspects, including the realization of the inalienable right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and property in accordance with international law, and relevant UN resolutions, particularly UNGA Resolution 194, and reaffirm the support for the Palestinian people in their struggle to achieve justice and fulfill their inalienable rights and legitimate national aspirations, including to self-determination, freedom and independence in their sovereign and independent state of Palestine, with East Jerusalem as its capital. NAM calls on all member states to uphold their obligations in accordance with international law, the relevant resolutions, and the rulings of International Court of Justice, and to undertake tangible actions, including urgent measures of accountability, to bring an end to this prolonged and tragic injustice, to end the illegal Israeli occupation, and assist the Palestinian people to finally realize their rights. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank the representative of Uganda. I now give the floor to the representative of Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, Sri Lanka welcomes the Democratic Republic of the Congo's presidency of the Security Council and appreciates the convening of this important meeting. We also thank the comprehensive briefing provided by Mr. Ramiz Al-Kabarov, the Deputy Special Coordinator for the Middle East process. Sri Lanka associates itself with the statement delivered by Uganda on behalf of the non-aligned movement. The Palestinian people continue to face intense hardship. Civilians in Gaza remain displaced and reliant on humanitarian assistance for the most basic necessities of life. Behind these familiar words are families that have lost their homes and their loved ones. Sri Lanka calls for the full observance of the ceasefire and the implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions. Humanitarian assistance must reach all those in need safely and without obstruction. International humanitarian law must be respected. Civilians, humanitarian personnel, and UN premises must be protected. UNRWA and United Nations agencies remain indispensable. Their ability to operate must be preserved, and they must receive the political and financial support necessary to carry out their mandates. Madam President, the recovery and reconstruction of Gaza must be an urgent priority. Palestinian people who have endured so much cannot be asked to continue living among ruins. The resolve of the Palestinian people remains strong. 2 teenage sisters from Gaza were recently named regional winners of the Earth Prize after developing reusable building blocks from rubble. They plan to train other young people to do the same, so that Palestinians can take part in reconstruction rather than depend entirely on outside help. Their example speaks to the determination of the Palestinian people to reclaim their future. The international community must match that resolve, that the protection and opportunity needed for recovery. Madam President, the situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, also demands the Council's attention. Settlement expansion, demolitions and violence must end. Attempts to alter the demographic character or legal status of the occupied Palestinian territory are incompatible with international law and undermine the prospects for peace. International efforts must now be directed towards ending the suffering of the Palestinian people and securing a future in which they can live in dignity and shape their own destiny. Declarations and diplomatic initiatives are meaningful only when they lead to positive change in people's lives. Sri Lanka reaffirms its support for the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, including their right to self-determination, for the establishment of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side with Israel in peace and security, and the Palestinians' full membership in the United Nations. The path forward is well known. What remains necessary is the political will to stand with them and follow that path. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sri Lanka for this statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Madam President. The Philippines thanks the Democratic Republic of Congo for convening this quarterly open debate. The Philippines shares the continuing deep concern of the international community over the situation in Palestine. Philippines reaffirms its consistent and principled support for the inalienable right of self-determination of the Palestinian people and to the two-state solution. We strongly believe that the two-state solution remains the only viable path to lasting and durable peace, with Palestine and Israel coexisting side by side in peace and security. We call for the full implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 2334 and 2803 in accordance with the UN Charter. The Philippines emphasizes the primacy of international law, particularly international humanitarian law, in the protection of civilians and safeguarding of vulnerable groups, including women and children. The Philippines calls on all parties to advocate for de-escalation, restraint, and resumption of meaningful dialogue to ensure the unimpeded delivery of assistance to affected populations. The support of partners is crucial in this regard. The Philippines, together with Japan, was honored to have hosted the 5th ministerial meeting of the Conference of Cooperation among East Asian Countries for Palestinian Development last 22 July 2026 in the Philippines in Pasay City. Participating countries expressed deep concern over the continuing humanitarian crisis in Palestine and underscored the role of the conference to promote effective technical cooperation and humanitarian assistance to the people of Palestine, including through the UNRWA. The Philippines recognizes the critical role of UNRWA in delivering essential and life-saving services, especially to those most in need, including primary health care and education. The Philippines will continue to work with the international community and partners to build a secure, peaceful, and prosperous future that every Palestinian family deserves. Madam President, we express serious concern over the rapidly evolving situation across the Middle East, including in Iran, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. We are deeply concerned that developments severely undermine ongoing efforts for mediation and diminish the prospects for peaceful resolution through dialogue. We reaffirm the importance of maintaining maritime safety and security and upholding freedom of navigation in and overflight above straits used for international navigation, in accordance with international law, in particular the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The Philippines calls for the restoration of the safe, unimpeded, and continuous transit passage of vessels and aircraft in the Strait of Hormuz, as well as for all parties to ensure the safety of seafarers and ships in accordance with the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. We recognize the immediate and long-term effects of the Middle East crisis on the well-being of our people and on regional trade, energy, and food security, including energy markets and global supply chains. In conclusion, Madam President, the Philippines calls on the Security Council, together with the United Nations and regional partners, to reinforce its efforts to support mediation, dialogue, and confidence building that reduce tensions, prevent escalation, and create lasting conditions for peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Philippines for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I congratulate you on your able presidency of the Security Council for the month of July. I also thank Mr. Ramiz Al-Akbarov for his valuable presentation. Madam President, when the ceasefire was announced on October 2025, the Palestinian people, the international community, and indeed humanity itself hoped it will mark the beginning of relief in Gaza. Yet today, that hope has given way to an even darker reality. Nearly 10 months have elapsed since the ceasefire entered into effect. And since, Israeli violations, Israeli attacks have not ceased for a single day. As a result, more than 1,200 Palestinians have been killed and several thousands more injured. We are equally alarmed by reports that Israel, the occupying power of Gaza, a Palestinian territory, is now constructing an earthen barrier along the so-called Yellow Line, further exacerbating Gaza's fragmentation while continuing to destroy and to depopulate areas under occupations. Meanwhile, the West Bank has become a scene of relentless violence. Brutal military operations have driven mass displacement from refugee camp, while killings of Palestinian civilians, particularly women and children, continues unabated. Settler violence, illegal settlement expansion, Palestinian home demolition and confiscation of land continue to accelerate the systematic erosion of the Palestinian presence in the territory. Madam President, against this grim backdrop, I would like to highlight the following points. First, these atrocities are the direct consequence of prolonged impunity. Yes, impunity. Israel's systematic annihilation of the Palestinian people, of their land, and of their means of existence has been allowed to continue without accountability. As long as impunity prevails, such violations of international humanitarian law, of resolution of UN Security Council will persist unchecked. Second, Madam President, this Security Council must fully assume its responsibilities. It must ensure full respect of the terms of the ceasefire. It must guarantee the protection of civilians and humanitarian personnel. It must secure unhindered humanitarian access to the Palestinian civilians. And it must create the condition, finally, of the immediate reconstruction of Gaza for the Palestinians, not for foreigners. Third, President, Israel policies and practice in the occupied territories remain a clear violation of international law, as reaffirmed by the International Court of Justice in July 2024. and Security Council Resolution 2334 whose implementation can no longer be postponed. The Palestinian people continue to demonstrate extraordinary resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering. Their endurance reminds us that peace cannot be built under any occupation, cannot be built under injustice or collective punishment. Peace requires justice. Justice requires accountability, and accountability requires action. Action from this very Security Council. To conclude, Madam President, allow me to reaffirm Algeria's unwavering support for the inalienable right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and for the establishment of its sovereign and independent state with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, Madam President. Gaza has become the graveyard of this Council's promises. For nearly 3 years, Israel has carried out a genocide in full view of the world. Every delayed decision has given that genocide more time. Every unenforced resolution has given Israel greater impunity. The ceasefire announced in October 2025 did not end Palestinian suffering. Across the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, settlement expansion, demolition, land seizure, and settler violence are driving forced displacement and de facto annexation. Israel's impunity is not confined to Gaza. Its attacks, illegal occupation, and repeated violations across Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria are destabilizing the region. The Council must take 3 steps: set deadlines, verify compliance, and impose consequences. On Palestine, the Council must demand an immediate end to attacks on civilians, settlement expansion, demolitions, forced displacement, and restrictions on humanitarian access. It should require regular reporting on Israel's compliance. UNRWA must be protected. The sanctity of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the historic and legal status quo of the holy sites must be respected. On Lebanon, the Council should require Israel to end its attacks and withdraw from all Lebanese territory immediately. UNIFIL should verify that withdrawal, and the Secretary General should report to the Council before the mission ceases its operations. Israel must respect Lebanon's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity in accordance with Resolution 1701. On Syria, Israel must end its occupation of the Syrian Golan. The Council should require the immediate removal of Israeli forces, positions, and roadblocks from the area of separation, and ensure that UNDOF can verify compliance with the 1974 disengagement agreement. The Maldives reaffirms its commitment to the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Syria, and supports a Syrian-owned, Syrian-led political process as outlined in the Council Resolution 2254. Non-compliance must have consequences. The Council should impose targeted sanctions on individuals and entities responsible for obstructing humanitarian aid, attacking civilians or UN personnel, and expanding illegal settlements. The Maldives reiterates its call for an arms embargo against Israel. Member states must stop supplying weapons used to sustain genocide and occupation and attacks across the region. These measures must advance a political outcome, the recognition of an independent and sovereign state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Palestine must be admitted as a full member of the UN. Palestinians do not need another description of their suffering. They need deadlines, verifications, and consequences for the perpetrators. Genocide must end, occupation must end, and Palestine must be free. The Maldives will stand with Palestine until justice is secured, its sovereignty is restored, and its people live in freedom on their own land. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Maldives for that statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ireland.
Thank you, President. I thank the Democratic Republic of the Congo for convening this important meeting. Ireland aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. President, Ireland remains deeply concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. 9 months since the ceasefire agreement was announced, the people of Gaza still urgently need to see a real improvement in their daily lives. We must, all of us, apply more pressure on Israel to uphold its obligation under international humanitarian law and remove restrictions on aid access and facilitate essential supplies and services to reach people unimpeded throughout the Gaza Strip. This obligation was confirmed by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion on the 22nd of October 2025, and it is simply not tenable for Israel to assert dual-use labelling to block the entry of basic humanitarian equipment. Ireland is deeply concerned that Israel continues to increase the area of Gaza that it occupies, unilaterally moving demarcation of the so-called Yellow Line and further displacing Palestinians from their homes. All parties must honour their commitments under the comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict. In this regard, we continue to call for the permanent disarmament of Hamas and other non-state armed groups and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. President, we urge Israel to open all crossing points and facilitate freedom of movement for Palestinians into and out of the Strip. We further condemn the continuing Israeli policy of restricting access for foreign journalists to visit Gaza and to report on the situation there independently. Ireland reiterates its unwavering support and strong appreciation for UNRWA's continued efforts to support Palestine refugees. We regret that UNRWA continues to face political and financial pressures to its operations, including the impacts of Israeli legislation on UNRWA's operations in Palestine. President, Ireland is alarmed by the increasing extremist settler violence in the West Bank, which continues within an environment of impunity. Accountability for such violence is imperative, and the West Bank must be a central part of efforts to reach agreement on a durable and sustainable peace through implementation of the two-state solution. President, we are deeply concerned by the continuing conflict in the Gulf region and its devastating humanitarian, economic and political impacts. All sides there are obliged to uphold international law, including international humanitarian law. We call on the parties to the conflict to engage meaningfully and in good faith and to return to negotiations provided for in the MOU they agreed on in mid-June. There is no military solution to this conflict. A durable peace can only be achieved through dialogue and diplomacy. President, we welcome last month's trilateral agreement between Israel, Lebanon and the United States. We hope that the full implementation of this agreement builds momentum for the disarmament of Hezbollah, the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops, and the deployment of Lebanese armed forces in support of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity and the establishment of a lasting peace. The people of Lebanon have experienced conflict and interference from outside their country for far too long. President, we commend the Syrian authorities for their continued efforts to achieve a positive transition. The international community must support Syria to overcome remaining key risks, including internal violence, external interference and occupation of its territory, and the need for transitional justice and accountability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ireland for that statement. I give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President.
South Africa calls
South Africa thanks the Democratic Republic of Congo for convening this quarterly open debate on the Middle East, including the question of Palestine, providing all UN member states an opportunity to address the Council on a matter that lies at the core of resolving instability and insecurity in the region. Madam President, we welcome the pause in military strikes between the US and Iran following breaches of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding that was signed in June. This paves the way for renewed diplomatic efforts aimed at finding a peaceful and durable resolution to the ongoing conflict. Resolving the Strait of Hormuz crisis is vital for the global economy, as this is one of the strategic choke points for the global supply of oil and international trade. The ongoing disruption has introduced volatility in global oil prices, caused inflation, pushing millions into poverty. South Africa thus calls for an immediate cessation of hostilities, de-escalation, and a return to diplomacy through the Oman-mediated process and the Islamabad Framework Agreement. Madam President, we cannot discuss instability in the Middle East while ignoring its root cause in the continued occupation and unresolved Palestinian question. The credibility of the international rules-based system remain displaced and are being compressed into increasingly limited spaces by repeated expansion of the territory held by Israel. Moreover, Israeli forces reportedly issued maps showing that they control 64% of the territory, having advanced past the initial yellow line demarcating the approximately 50% of Gaza's territory. The continued targeting of civilians and civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, and UN shelters is a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Collective punishment of protected people cannot be justified, including the political campaign seeking to undermine UNRWA's credibility and operational mandate. This must stop. UNRWA plays a crucial role in delivering humanitarian aid to Palestinian refugees. South Africa reaffirms its full support for UNRWA's indispensable role in providing life-saving humanitarian assistance and human development services. UNRWA is not an optional actor. It is a lifeline for millions of Palestinian refugees. In conclusion, Madam President, South Africa reaffirms its commitment to peace in the Middle East and stands ready to share its experiences in peace building, transitional justice, reconciliation, and indeed is willing to assist in nation-building efforts. We believe that any path towards alleviating the suffering of the Palestinian people cannot be complete without ensuring their legitimate right to self-determination, including the right of return and the establishment of a sovereign, independent, and viable Palestinian state along the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for that statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.